I think that you should read a book. Why? Because it's fun and you can learn a lot. It's that simple. I mean, even though the process can be a little bit boring for some people, the benefits you can get, especially in these times where it seems that more and more people allow machines to think for them, can really benefit you in some way, shape or form. From critical analysis, better writing, learning a new language, or to better understand multiple types of media, and even having an expanded lexicon can be really good. Even in the simplest act, like communicating, can be greatly enhanced when you read. And I will highly recommend How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. It's the perfect crash course for getting into reading all these types of books, or any type of book, and also it greatly inspired me to make this video, given that I mentioned multiple key points or talking points on how to read and how to engage with the process of active reading, and well, how to ask the proper questions when you read. If you want to get knee deep into reading and get some really serious advice about how to read a book, well, that book is the perfect start for you. And well, first and most important part is just to slow down. Take your time with the book and let it sit with you. I mean, if you're only skimming it to try to reach a goal for how many books you have read in the past month, that isn't going to cut it. Because, well, in order to truly understand the book, you will have to read it again and again and again, multiple times. So, take your time with it, there is absolutely no rush, and in the end you will be getting a lot more out of the book, instead of just reading 10 or 15 books a month and not being able to recall any of it. And there are a lot of books that you can choose from fiction to non-fiction. There are a plethora of options at your disposal, that picking one that piques a particular interest of you is a good option. There is really not that much that goes into selecting a book. Whenever you like is going to work, and that it's as simple as that. For me in particular, I've been really into linguistics. Books that talk about semantics, morphology, and syntax is really interesting to me. And anything that talks about how we use and engage with language is appealing. But for you, that topic could be pretty boring, and that's okay. That's the cool part of reading, is that you don't need to like every subject, and there is no good or bad topics to choose from. Now that you have the book, it's time for you to start reading. So, how do you read? Well, there are words on the page, and those are clearly trying to communicate something to you, so why not pay attention to what those words are saying to you? If you're reading a novel, for example, you might want to pay attention to the names of the characters and the world that they're living in. What type of scenario or scene comes to mind when you are reading those descriptions? I mean, is it cold? Is it warm? Is it in a city? In an apartment? In the mountains? A forest? A cave? I mean, I don't know. And no one is going to know unless you start reading. Now, what type of characters are you looking at? What are their motivations, strengths and weaknesses? What are they trying to achieve? What they are going to do to achieve that? And those are the usual questions that you will want to ask when you're reading fiction. Note that there is more to just asking those questions, like understanding the meaning of the plot, what is the general message or the metaphor, or what the author is trying to portray. But for now, you should only worry about the simple stuff. But sure enough, bit by bit, and the more you read, the more easy it's going to be for you to understand and see those messages in between the lines. You will be able to see different phases and areas of the plot that you didn't catch on your first read, and then you will have a more personal understanding of the book. This means that you can properly critique it and express some things that you didn't personally like, or now you will be able to get why you like the book and pinpoint the reasons and elements of the book that made you like it. And when it comes to non-fiction books, it can get a little bit tricky. It's not like it's going to be harder, but a little bit different. Because, well, not all non-fiction books are going to be read the same way like fiction. Because, well, sure, in fiction there are multiple types of books and genres like plays, novels, epics and poems and so on, but at the end of the day, you are still reading a story. There are characters that go through an arc, and there's a story that has a beginning, a middle and an end. Usually there's a message or a metaphor that the author is trying to say, and that's it. The thing is, when it comes to non-fiction, I think that they are far more different of one another. For example, you can't read philosophy the same way as mathematics and sciences, or social sciences as history, or even read a research paper like a dictionary. Hello, I'm going to explain a little bit more what I mean when talking about the differences between fiction and non-fiction. Mainly because I think that in fiction it's pretty much, you're going to be reading it the same way, no matter the setting, the characters, or even the era in which the book was written. But when it comes to non-fiction, it's you will have to read each genre in a different way. Your approach to reading is going to be different depending on the genre or topic of the book. And I have some examples. I have 4 examples, 2 non-fiction and 2 fiction. And here I have 2 non-fiction books. This is Lao Tse's Tao Te Ching and Steven Pinker's Language Instinct. Tao Te Ching, it's a philosophy book. It's ancient Chinese philosophy, and you're going to approach this book the same way as like Plato, Aristotle, I don't know, Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche. It's philosophy. You're going to be reading it the same way, like dissecting each and every single sentence and paragraph and figuring out what they meant by that and all that mental shenanigans that happen when you're reading philosophy. This one, it's a little bit more digestible because it's passages. Like, instead of just reading paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, this is just a couple of passages and it basically tells you how to live a more calm life, like how to be, like, you need to be less wealthy, you need to achieve, well, what I get is like you need to achieve peace instead of happiness. And I think it's good. I like it, mainly because it's far more digestible than other philosophy books. And then we have Steven Pinker's The Language Instinct. And this is pretty much a linguistics book. It talks about, well, it says in the title, how the mind creates language, how we come up with syllables, rhymes, like how we construct grammar rules, like how do we approach like noun phrases, verb phrases, how we recognize suffixes, affixes, and what those mean when you apply them to words and sentences and all that shit. And so you need to be really into linguistics if you want to get this book. And this book sets some examples on different English dialects that have their own set of grammar rules and how they are far more complex than apparently people tend to notice. So, for example, you have here some verb phrases, some verb phrases in the syllables here, and it explains like how they work, how we recognize them at a pretty young age, and how we apply those grammar rules. Even though if we apply those grammar rules incorrectly, that says that we get a grasp of what a grammar rule is. And it's a lot. This book is a lot. It's pretty chunky, but if you're into linguistics, this is a pretty good book. But my point is that you are not going to be reading these 2 books the same way. You're not going to be approaching these books the same, even though they are non-fiction. But when it comes to fiction, it's pretty much the same, no matter if it's a poem, an epic, a novel, a play, even though plays need a little bit more of effort to read, because mainly you need to imagine a little bit more what the scene plays out, different tones and intonations of different dialogues. But at the end of the day, you're still following characters through arcs. There's a story, there's usually a metaphor, and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's it. And to explain that, I have here two fiction books that are very different from each other, because one is, it's Dmitry Glukovsky Metro 2033, sorry, and México Negro by Francisco Martín Moreno. And so these 2 books are pretty different. One is about a post-apocalyptic war story, and one is a political novel about contemporary Mexico. And even though these two settings and characters are completely different, you're still following a story. There's a beginning, a middle, of an end. There's a climax. There's an epilogue. You're going to be reading Metro the same way as you're reading Mexico Negro, because they're novels. This is really, if you play the games, please do yourself a favor and buy the books and read them. They're pretty cool. This is a post-apocalyptic war Russian story, and this is about the corruption of the Mexican country. These two books have characters, they have a story, but even though they're pretty different in setting and characters, again, I reiterate, you're going to be reading these two books the same way. You're following a story, you're following characters. You need to remember the characters, the motivations of said characters, and yeah, that's my point. With across imaginative literature or fiction, you're pretty much reading, even if you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, you're still following characters through a story. And the Iliad and the Odyssey are pretty ancient books, vastly different from these two, but still, you're following characters through a story. And so that's my point. When it comes to non-fiction, each genre of non-fiction is going to have a very different approach. For example, in maths and sciences, you're going to be asking questions like, okay, what's the problem? What kind of problem is it? How it got solved? If it got solved in the first place? And all that sort of stuff. I'm not particularly good in math and sciences, but it's not just that. Now imagine imagine computer science. That's a whole set of, like, a subgenre of maths and sciences. And computer science has that set of problems and situations that the author tries to solve, if it solves it. And when it comes to when it comes to history, you need to take into account a lot of shit, like, okay, I'm reading a description of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Okay, who wrote it, when it was written, what side am I, what sources does the author took from, and there's a lot of different, what I'm trying to get at, it's in nonfiction there are a lot of different genres that require a specific set of approaches when you're reading it, and that's usually not the case with fiction, or imaginative literature. And that was, I hope I explained myself a little bit better, but that's the point I'm trying to make. So then, how are you supposed to read each type of book when not all nonfiction books are written the same way, and each genre and even subgenre have their own way of interacting with it that differs from one another, and what? Well, it is not as difficult as it may appear. First of all is to classify the book properly before you read. Take a look at the title and the preface of the book. What is it talking about? What things come to your mind when reading the title? This step, as insignificant as it appears, is going to help you a lot. It will give you the necessary grounds for you to begin your reading without feeling completely lost. Then, try to pay attention to recurring themes and topics that the book is stating. Eventually, that is going to give away what is the book about and the whole theme and purpose of the book. Also, it is important to ask the proper questions. But this time, we're going to ask a different set of questions instead of fiction. What are the key words? What problem is the author trying to solve? What type of question is the author asking? At the end of the day, the questions that you're going to be asking yourself will depend on the type of the book that you are reading. And there is way more stuff to do when reading both fiction and non-fiction, like identifying knowledge from mere opinions, knowing the difference between propositions and statements from the author, and most importantly, the 4 levels of reading, which are elementary, inspectional, and I think it's analytical and synoptical reading. So, If you really want to know how to read each type of level and both each type of fiction and non-fiction, I will once again highly recommend you to read How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. In the end, reading can be really good for you. Even if you hate reading or back in school you had an awful time, or even when you have ADHD like me, it can seem almost impossible. But if you take the time and put in the hours, you are going to get better and better at it. Think of it as a skill that you are working on. Each time that you tackle something challenging and you succeed, you are going to get better at it. It really can't be understated that being able to read properly can do wonders for you. To being able to critique something and understanding why, to being able to identify what the author is trying to solve or understanding why it was solved, without to mention coming up with your own interpretations that are unique to you. And even the more you read, the more you're going to be able to think. If you disagree with something, then read more about it, or read that same topic but written by different people. Maybe their perspective will show you a face of that particular topic that you didn't catch at first glance. And even if you agree with what you are being presented with, you are going to be able to explain why, instead of just blindly saying that you agree or that you disagree. That's why I think reading is important, no matter if it's a novel, a poem, an essay, a research paper, philosophy, science, whatever. Anything can and will help you if you give it a time. Now, it is important to take note that not all books are easy to read. There are some books that are intended for the general public and others intended for people that are already familiarized with the topic and jargon. This is important to take notice because sometimes we can get a little bit ahead of ourselves and think that we know way more than we actually know. So when picking up a book, it is important to check what we are getting ourselves in. Even so, those hard books are the ones that are going to help you a lot to understand the most out of any topic at the end of the day. So why don't you go out there to your local library or your shopping website of your preference and pick up whatever is interesting to you. And I think that's pretty much it, and I will see you in the next one. So pick up a book and start reading.